The future of Barbarians all comes down to this. The patch notes are out, we're going to go over it and see just how good Barbarians are going to be in Season 1 for Diablo 4. Let's get it. What up team, it is MurderInc. We are talking about the patch notes. Everyone's talking about it, most people are crying about it, but we're Barbarians. We don't do that here. We are strong. So before we get into this, we have to talk about something. Like I said, tons of people are complaining about Barbarians, and I mean, people are complaining about all of the classes because there were some pretty significant nerfs with this patch. The thing is, we're getting patch notes that's scaled to a game tuning for Season of the Malignant, right? We don't have the gems, we don't have the scaling, we don't have any of that in the current game. So for these 2 days, of course you're gonna feel weaker. Of course you are. They took all of this into consideration with the new gem power-ups we're going to get. You can spectate all you want, look at them, say it's not gonna make up for the damage. Who cares? Who cares, right? We're still going to have fun. We're still going to play the game. If you're going to swap from class to class, finding whatever the meta build's going to be, it's in your nature to complain. It's just who you are as a player. But if you enjoy playing the class you're playing, they're all fine. Trust me. I know some classes got shafted, some did not get shafted, but you're going to be able to complete all the content you want to complete. Now, if you're thinking about things like Uber Lilith and Nightmare Dungeon 100, it's supposed to be the hardest part of the game. Am I saying that the fact that people were doing it before me is not hard? No. Was it hard enough? Absolutely not. The fact that I could test builds, and you can look at my past videos, I was going to Nightmare 100 dungeons and testing builds in Nightmare 100 in showcases. You should not be able to do that. I should have been getting owned without spending like tons of gold to min-max that specific build for Nightmare 100. It should take 30 minutes, 35 minutes minimum to complete a Nightmare 100 dungeon because it should be that hard, where you're waiting cooldown pack to pack. Every single pack's very stressful and just things like that. That's what you want out of a game, having difficult content that's that hard. So I kind of just wanted to briefly talk about that because people are complaining and it's cringe. It is cringe. So let's get into the patch notes. Okay, diving into this, this is just a copy paste from the patch notes. I took all of the relevant stuff. Could I have missed something? Maybe. I don't think I did, but we'll get into that. So Azure Wrath, first unique sword, lucky hit, core skills, 20% chance to freeze. It's whatever. Don't really look at the deal damage. That's probably an incorrect tooltip. We'll see the real damage once it scales to our level. You guys know how it is. So this is cool. It's going to have some synergy down the line here. Moving on to the next, Audacity, general utility aspect here. This one's really good, as you probably can tell. 5 close enemies, chance to stun them for 2 to 4 seconds. So that's a pretty big defensive layer despite having a 20-second cooldown. Craven, increased movement speed when slower chilled enemies. Chilled is more along the lines of maybe something we can do. Our slow was cut in half because of a nerf. Yeah, we can call it a nerf to the hamstring skill, and we'll see that later on. The next thing we're talking about is going to be Ancestral Charge, offensive aspect. I'm not really sure. I think it's too early, right? We have to test and see what the damage is going to be like for Ancestral Charge. Yes, it calls forth 4 ancients who will also use the charge ability, but it doesn't hit that hard, right? So charge, it doesn't do a ton of damage, and I mean, it has no cooldown. You can make it to where the cooldown's practically 0, so there is that, but it's hard to see how this would work if you're going to use this as the main damage dealing for your Barbarian. Next, we have fixed an issue with the class quest. Who cares? Iron Maelstrom, I think they did this wrong. As someone that's an Iron Maelstrom enjoyer, from that video that I made with my favorite forever most expensive build for the Whirlwind, which I'm gonna of course try playing. I'm going to play it and see if it's viable still, which it should be, but they fixed an issue where if you don't know what this is, I'm pretty sure this is what they're talking about. If you cast Iron Maelstrom, it covers your bar with Iron Maelstrom skills on all 6. You hit it 3 times. First it's the bludgeon weapon, then it's the slashing, then it's the one-handers. but if you hit the one-handed thing fast enough, it did it twice. I've never seen it do it 3 times, but I don't know, maybe that's what they're referring to, where you can repeat the one-handed version. I don't understand where Warcry comes into this, because it completely covers your bar, so you can't even cast any other skills. So maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I played with Iron Maelstrom quite a bit and don't really see what bug there was, but whatever. Fixed an issue where stacking, ripping, Skullbreaker, and Anemia. Did a video on this, the Ren video. It's unfortunate they nerfed this because bleeds weren't in a great spot, even with this bug here, and they fixed it, so I don't know. We'll see how this is. They fixed Hammer the Ancients. That's the next thing. I knew it was coming. You should have known it was coming. It's why I never made a Hammer the Ancients build revolving around that Quake bug. So that's gone here, and it can be buffed in the future now because they did this properly. You would never buff a skill that has a bugged interaction. You would always fix the bug first, then buff it if they're going to. So this, at least I have to give credit where credit is due. It's in the right direction. Now they just have to kind of tune the damage or get some feedback for what's going on here. All right, so next thing we're talking about are going to be the skill changes. We have a vulnerable change to double swing, which doesn't do much because you already had 100% uptime. Furious upheaval damage, that skill. I said this would be a good change, but 3 to 5% is, I can't see it being enough. I think Wudijo made a build, and he was showcasing it in like tier 20 and said it could go up to tier 70. I would have to see it. It's not enough to see someone doing it at tier 20. The build looked good, but the upheaval usage, from watching the gameplay, I saw too many things that would go wrong in a higher level of difficulty that I wasn't okay with. So that's kind of where I stand on upheaval. I don't think it's good enough yet. I think they would have had to done more changes to it. Next, we have power charge cooldown reduction is now capped to 3 targets for a maximum of 9 seconds. Understandable. Tactical ground stomp fury gain. This is massive. Keep an eye out for a leveling guide that's going to come out after this video for probably the best and smoothest build to get you to wherever you want to get to in the game, whether it's level 50 or head straight into Nightmare Dungeons. I made a really cool build, spent lots of hours testing all of the different builds, and especially with the changes we're seeing here, I thought it was going to change a few things, but it made the build that I made for leveling much better. And this is one change that did that, so I like this a lot. Next, we have enhanced death blows damage to bosses increased from 100 to 150. This is nice. A 50% multiplicative multiplier is a good addition. However, I don't think that was the issue with death blow. Yes, we do need more boss damage, but I think death blow needed something else on top of that. Like, if you crit on a boss on top of this multiplier, you reduce the cooldown. Because even having 2 charges, I don't think this is enough to push death blow where we need it to be to make single target much better for Barbarian, which we definitely need that. Next, we have enhanced steel grasp, vulnerable duration from 2.5 to 3 seconds. Again, not a huge deal in my opinion, because a lot of builds with steel grasp have some type of skill that's refreshing the duration of vulnerable, like double swing or rend, which is extending it, so I don't think it's a huge change. Next, we have enhanced rupture damage, increased from 30 to 45. No complaints there. Warrior Rupture's attack speed from 20 to 30. 10% is no small addition, so I'm definitely happy with that change. We'll see if any Rupture builds surface, which they potentially can with the Malignant Heart system for sure. Then we have Fighters Rupture. Healing increase from 15 to 18, very small change. Next, we have passive. This is what I was talking about before. Hamstring now only slows healthy enemies. So once they're not healthy, no more slow, so you're not getting that increased crit rate. So this is definitely a nerfed Barbarian overall. If you were using it, which is the only purpose you had to use it, for gaining increased crit rate. Next, we have cut to the bone, bleeding damage to vulnerable targets reduced. So I guess they're anticipating, and they must have done some testing on their side. I'm not joking. I think they probably did do something where bleed builds are gonna skyrocket. It is what it is. I don't personally believe it, but they must believe it. So that definitely took a hit. Next, we have the Paragon. This is a very good change. I'm pretty sure every class got this, whatever their equivalent of Wrath Glyph is. Now affects all damage instead of just core skills. It takes, well, has the potential, I won't say it takes, has the potential to take some of the emphasis of core skills, being the main damage dealers, out of builds. Next, we have aspect changes. None of these are too big. Berserking duration 1 to 2 seconds. Aspect, Battle Mad aspect increased by second on the far end. Brawlers aspect, it increased there. Burning Rage, small damage increase. Iron Warrior, damage reduction increase, which is nice. Slaking aspect, which is important for the leveling build. The lucky hit chance was increased, which only 10%, but we'll take what we can get. Ancestral Echo's lucky hit chance increased by 10% as well. And then Weapon Master's lucky hit chance increased by very small 5% total, which isn't that big. Next we have Ghors. This is something I've tested. This is why I didn't release the patch review video on the first day, because it's important to test this stuff, right? It just gives you a better foothold instead of reacting it and saying, oh, I think this could work that way. I mean, I'm going to do that for a few of these, but Ghors specifically I tested because it's interesting, because it explodes every 2 seconds. But what's more important is kind of to look at this as a source of fire damage. And we'll see why that's important a little bit later, but I think they should have made this 5 seconds. 5 seconds is much better. You would have gotten a bigger number, and you can use it more optimally on vulnerable targets. Every 2 seconds is, I mean, I guess you could make a case for saying 2 seconds is nice because exploit lasts for 3 seconds. Exploit makes the target vulnerable, so you're always going to have Ghors blowing up on its own during the vulnerable window. You don't have to cancel your Whirlwind, which I believe is what they were thinking. I'm pretty sure, if I had to take a guess, that was their thought process. Why have Ghors when you can only ramp it up for 3 seconds of the exploit window? Then having it explode outside of the exploit window isn't good because we have no way of reapplying vulnerable to the targets, which I think is an issue with Whirlwind. They should make it so there's a skill or something that makes Whirlwind reapply vulnerable in an AoE on targets you hit after every 5 seconds. That would be amazing. But I'm dreaming, once again. So Fields of Crimson, bleeding damage bonus from 10 to 15. That's okay. Next, we have some universal changes to aspects which are important to go over. Disobedience was nerfed. Now, if you weren't expecting this, I don't know what to say, because everyone knew this was coming, so it finally did happen. Reduced from 100 to 60. It's big, but it's reasonable still. A lot of people had builds that they were hitting the respected armor cap with this on their chest. Now they move it to the necklace, they increase the armor slightly, and you're back to the cap, right? So this is a big deal, but it's not as big of a deal as the damage reduction changes, which we'll go over later on. Next, we have a pretty big nerf to a bonus of ours, Retribution. It's very popular with the no bleed Mace Whirlwind build that I made a guide and video on, and that got cut in half. So it's still the best Whirlwind build from what I've tested. It's going to be the Mace build. I believe the Axe build, from what I've tested so far, has moved up a slot for sure, because now the Cleaver glyph is very strong. Very, very strong with the nerfs to the stats, which we haven't gone over yet, but if you know about it, you know about it. Then we have Exploiter's aspect bonus damage to Unstoppable reduced from 20 to 50 to 20 to 40. Nothing crazy there. Starlight aspects resource restore increased from 10 to 22, so that was doubled. Strength 50% stronger when on weapons, now it's 25% stronger. Same for Dex, Int, and Willpower. Cooldown reduced by 30%. We took a hit again to our shouts because I don't actually know why. I really don't. This isn't just to Barbarians, of course. This is to every single class where these bonuses are applied to, but I guess they want people to make builds that aren't abusing things, and every class has to suffer because of it. So we did take a hit there. There are ways to get around it. We have Disembowel, we have Rage of Harrogath. Don't think we'd ever use the chest piece because with the survivability changes we had, we were affected quite heavily, but it is what it is. So now we have Crit Strike damage reduced by 17%, vulnerable damage reduced by 40%. Here's the thing. Their logic behind doing this was to make builds less reliant on vulnerable damage and crit strike damage. However, after testing, additive passives like damage to their damage while berserking, physical damage, damage while crowd control, damage to bleeding targets, you still want to stack crit damage and vulnerable damage. So all they really did was nerf the damage of every single class. They didn't make it less reliant on these two. For Barbarians specifically, I won't speak to every class. I do have them all. I can see there are some builds that can get away with not relying too much on crit strike damage and vulnerable damage, but pretty much for most classes, these stats, they didn't become better, but they're still the best by a lot. Main stat, crit, vulnerable damage, top 3. There's really not a lot of competition. Crit strike damage inherent on swords reduced by 50%. This can open up some things because some of the inherents of the other things like axes that I mentioned, 84% healthy damage compared to the current amount of crit strike damage we have, plus the cleaver glyph, it makes it more competitive. I didn't think it would, but I was wrong. So when I tested it, the axe damage was much closer to the two-handed mace no bleed variant that I briefly mentioned before, so that is the good news. If you're an axe enjoyer, build got better in relation to all of the builds. That's the one thing to keep in mind. So here, I'm not going to go over all of these, but these are just the generic increases that we saw from the additive pool, I guess, and I only kept the ones for Barbarian. I could have deleted one by accident, but I don't think so. Now you have total armor reduced by 30%, making it harder to build survivability. Attack speed while dodging, don't think we have that. Damage while dodging, don't think we have that. So damage reduction was nerfed overall, and I'm going to pause here. You can see the reductions here, and we'll go to a post here. So Mr. Lord Nunu, which is the theory crafter in my Discord. If you have perfect rolls on gear, which is outside of the season, and no other sources of DR on your character, you are taking 73% more damage. If you have other sources of damage reduction, this number goes up. So if you are still playing on the non-seasonal Eternal version with these changes, you're going to be taking a significant amount more damage because of all of the damage reduction nerfs here. And I guess it's worth, we'll just talk about what Beatdropper wrote. CC duration still works on Challenging Shout, if you don't know about that. Increased CC duration rolls and the aspects like smiting and exploiters apply to the taunt of Challenging Shout, but it also extends how long Challenging Shout lasts. This is probably going to become meta for every single build now that these changes are here. This is just a brief of what happened to our damage pretty much with the current build. Whirlwind still doesn't work with attack speed, and Aerogath still only works with skills that inherently apply bleed, so two-handed sword expertise and berserk ripping do not work. So they didn't fix these things. Thought they were going to address attack speed with Whirlwind since it's on the Ghors gloves, but they didn't. So we just have to deal with it for now. What we're going to talk about now is the Malignant Hearts. This is worth going over because this is what the game has been scaled around. So we have the Bacana. Vicious, offensive, critical strikes electrically charge the enemy for 0.75 to 2.5 seconds, causing lightning to arc between them and any other charged enemies, dealing lightning damage. Of course, we'll see the actual tooltip once we get in game and it scales up to our level. Next, we have Dark Dance, vicious, offensive, world tier 3 every 5 seconds while above 60% life. Core skills cost life instead of primary resources. Skills that consume life deal 10 to 20% increased damage. So, don't know if this is additive or multiplicative. If it's multiplicative, then we're talking. If it's additive, you might not want to be taking life from yourself in the current, I guess, fragile state we can consider every single class in right now. I mean, there are a few boring ones that are still good, but we're barbarians. We're here to have fun. Next, we have Tempting Fate. You gain 40 to 60% critical strike damage, which is a lot, but your non-critical strikes deal 20 to 15% less damage. We're probably going to take this one. We're probably going to take that one. The Lionheart, brutal, defensive. You gain 10% barrier generation. You'll heal whatever life we see in game per second while you have an active barrier. I believe they're really trying to push healing. You're going to see it quite a bit in the changes once we get into the season, where they want us to heal. They do. We have a few sources of healing. It helps, I guess you can say, our effective health. It's a hard argument to make, but you can say it's an effective health gain for a defensive to have healing to constantly top yourself off. But one thing to note, and I should have mentioned this before, damage reduction while injured was not nerfed. So you can stack an incredible amount of damage reduction while injured, and that may be the play. However, it would bring our health low, which is why I do believe all of these changes that include healing are going to be so important. Next one we have is called Revenge. Brutal defense, world tier 3. 10 to 20% of incoming damage is instead suppressed. When using a defensive, subterfuge, or whatever, when using a defensive, all suppressed damage is amplified by 250% and explodes, dealing up to X amount fire damage to nearby enemies. This could be big. telling you right now, this could be big since we're going to be taking more damage. So another one to keep our eyes on for testing for sure is Revenge. So I mean, let me just mark them on what I think is really good. Let me go ahead and like highlight the ones I think are good. We'll turn this red. I think this one's really good. What else are we talking about? The critical strike damage one looks really good. And I mean, this is just me early speculating here. So these two for sure. Not sure about the barrier one for now. This one is still a question mark again, because we don't know if this damage increase is multiplicative or additive. So that's going to determine everything for this. And the first one, if we need lightning damage, this is going to be key, but if we don't, it is what it is. Next, we have Prudent Heart. You become immune for 2 to 4 seconds. After you lose more than 20% life in a single hit, the effect can only happen once every almost 2 minutes. So maybe ideal for pushing, but it's really, I don't know. We'll have to see how Prudent Heart plays out, but we already have something like this in that necklace enchant where it pretty much is the same thing, but it's a barrier around you. Next, we have Determination, Devious Utility. Resources draining effects are 40 to 50% less effective, so those annoying things on map modifiers, the resource burn, and things like Ramalodni Magnum Opus, the weapon, 40 to 50% less effective. In addition, you gain increased resource gen, so I would say for leveling, I mean, even though, I mean, I'm going to release a really good leveling build that you won't even need this, but this can help some builds, so I'm going to say this is really good for now. Next, we have Retaliation. Deals fire damage to surrounding enemies whenever a crowd control effect is removed from you. We'll see how the fire damage scales. This seems pretty mediocre. After spending 150 to 200 of your primary resource, your next attack stuns enemies hit for 2 seconds. So there's a lot of stunning going on. We already have an aspect that stuns. This one can be really good because it's very easy to spend 150, so we're going to mark this red as a really strong one. This one I saw like people talking about because it was kind of revealed early on. The Malignant Pack Wrathful Super. Cycle through Malignant bonus every 20 kills. You gain 20% attack speed. Core basics have a chance to fully restore your primary resource, and every 21 seconds you gain a barrier absorbing X damage. Of course, it will scale with your level. This is okay. People were saying it's going to be insane. I don't personally see it because it scales, and in my opinion, if your build cannot capitalize on all 3 of these, I don't think it's going to be that good compared to some of the other ones and how strong they are, but I could be wrong. Have to be tested for sure. Next, we have Creeping Death Wrathful Super. Your damage over time effects are increased by 30 to 40% for each different crowd control effect on the target. Unstoppable monsters and staggered bosses instead take 110 to 130 increased damage from your damage over time effects. So, I mentioned bleed builds and how they could be very strong. This is what I'm talking about. Stuns, freezing enemies. I don't think you can shock enemies in this game, but there's already a lot going on here. Knockdowns from Ground Stomp, which is surprisingly separate than a stun. If it applies here, bleeds can be very strong. Like I said, we're going to have to test this. It's hard to speculate so far, but this is another question mark. I'm not going to mark it red so far, but 110 to 130 increased damage for bosses that are staggered, which is pretty easy to do, and unstoppable monsters, it's a lot of damage. So next we have the Barber Wrathful Super. Critical strikes and all subsequent damage within 2 to 4 seconds is absorbed by your target. Then the absorbed damage erupts onto surrounding enemies. Stored damage is increased by 10% per second. 10, 20, 30, 40. Pretty self-explanatory. This can be good. Ghors will proc twice in this window with the new change, so this has the potential to be very strong. Like a huge AoE explosion every 4 seconds. And especially with high crit builds. I don't think it's going to do too well with bleed builds, but it's too early to make a comment about that just yet. Then we have the Barbarian specific ones. Focus Rage after spending 100 to 60 Fury. Within 2 seconds, your non-basic skills critical strike chance is increased by 20 to 30%. It's okay. You already have Mortal Draw, which you get a ton of damage to that skill afterwards, so it remains to be seen how strong Focus Rage will be. Next we have Resurgent Life. Brutal Defensive. While below 40 to 60% health, you receive 50 to 60% more healing from all sources. This can be very strong. We just talked about how important injured damage reduction is going to be and how powerful it is. Now when we do get there, instead of having to freak out and top ourselves back off, we have a pretty substantial boost to healing. So as of right now, with the way DR is looking, I'm going to say this one's pretty damn strong. Next, we have Punishing Speed, Devious Utility. Your skills have a 20 to 30% chance to knock down all enemies for 1.25 seconds when the skill's attack speed is higher than 35 to 20%. This one can be good if you don't want to use Ground Stomp to proc some of the things we've seen above here as far as different CCs in that bleed build. But how good this is going to be remains to be seen. Next, we have Ignoring Pain. Incoming damage has a 5 to 15% chance of being ignored and instead healing you for X amount, whatever it scales to. I mean, this is good. This is kind of like Dodge. I'm going to say this is really good for now because I think Dodge is now going to be a stat that's going to be very good for Barbarians in general, since you can get on so many different aspects and gear rolls, but 5 to 10 chance of ignoring all incoming damage that's coming at you. So we'll just say 15 if it high rolls per incoming damage. Just based off probability alone, you're taking away a lot of damage and giving you a good source of healing on top of that. I know it says 17 to 68. You can't look at the initial tooltips because for some reason they always release like the lowest possible level and not what it really scales up to. So I like this a lot. I think this is going to be very strong, and that's kind of the end of this. So we've 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 that just from reading look very strong. Like I said, they have to be tested. Could be wrong about some of them, and there could be some ones that I didn't highlight in red that aren't that good. But the fact that 7 are looking promising, it's more than I expected. I did not expect much from these Malignant Hearts, and I was happily wrong about this. So I'm excited for Season 1. I'm going to be playing a Barbarian, obviously, of every class, pretty much Biskier, and I've played them since the patches dropped and didn't like them before in comparison to Barbarian. Don't like him now in comparison to Barbarian. I think Barbarian's superior as far as fun goes, and that's really what matters to me in this game. So look forward to making those guides. If you look forward to that too, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified when I upload my next video, which is going to be the leveling one, which you're going to want to check out for sure. And I will see you there.